Okay, I'm going to talk about the stock market or stock markets in general. So, I'm going to point out a phenomenon that a lot of people don't think of when they're investing in stock markets, right? So, why do people invest in stock markets? Well, most people, most working class citizens, they invest in stock markets to make money, right? And in effect, they're trying to maybe they're trying to create a rainy day fund. Maybe they're trying to build a retirement account. Maybe they're trying to just avoid poverty, right? Maybe they're in effect, people fear poverty, so they're going to make these investments in the stock market to avoid poverty, right? To avoid the woes of poverty. So the middle class, what they do is they usually make these investments in large companies, right? They make investments in the S&P 500, okay? And why do they do that? Well, the S&P 500 is, it's a good bet, right? In the long term, the 500 largest companies are probably going to return your investments and beyond, right? You're probably going to profit in the long term from your interest payments, from the interest alone even. So the middle class, they make small investments in these large companies, right? A lot of small investments come from the middle class, and in effect, most of the capital investments that go to these companies, these large companies, come from the middle class. Okay, the middle class probably owns more than 50% of most corporations. Okay, most large publicly traded corporations. So they probably, again, even though those investments are small, there's so many investors in the middle class that they probably own more than 50% of the companies collectively. So what else happens with these the S&P 500? Who else invests in these companies? Well, obviously the large investors do, right? BlackRock, Vanguard, and Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, the billionaires, right? They also make investments, but their investments are large, right? BlackRock might own 8% of Apple or something like that. So what's happening here is, even though the middle class collectively owns more than 50% of these corporations, BlackRock and Vanguard and Bill Gates, they are the ones who are actually controlling the everyday operations of these companies, okay? And why is that? Why is it that even though BlackRock and Vanguard own less than 50% of the company, they're controlling the companies? Well, it's because they're more organized, right? The people who work for BlackRock, Vanguard, and Bill Gates, they spend their entire day trading stocks. It is their job to trade stocks, right? They're day traders. Meanwhile, the middle class employees, who probably make up the bulk of the capital that goes into these large corporations, they're not so organized, right? They're busy working. They have to work for a living. The large investors don't, okay? So there's a disparity in organization here. And what does this disparity enable? Again, it enables BlackRock, Vanguard, and the billionaires to control the everyday operations of these corporations. And what happens when they control the everyday operations of the corporations? Well, what happens is they end up controlling the wages. They end up controlling the prices of the products these corporations sell. So what's happening is these again, the large investors, the wealthy investors, that even though they don't own the majority of the company, they do make relatively larger investments per individual investor, right? So they're basically piggybacking off of the capital investments made by the lower class and the middle class, and they're profiting from those investments. Okay, so again, they're piggybacking off of the middle class investments, and they also control the companies because they're organized. So again, they set the prices, they set the wages. So they drive the wages down and drive the prices up, and in effect, they are able to pay themselves more in dividends, right? And who pays the price for those decreasing wages and those increasing prices? Well, the middle class does, right? So the working class, the middle class, is so unorganized that they're being shafted out of their investments, basically. And the only reason it happens is because of this disparity in organization. So the solution to the problem is simple. The middle class needs to use the power of their investments, use the power of the majority of the ownership of the majority of these companies, and control the everyday operations. It's really simple. It's all just a perception thing. And it's like, until BlackRock owns 51% of Apple, Apple is controlled by the middle class who own most of the investments in Apple. So I'm going to give you a scenario here and lay it out. So we'll take two companies, Apple and Google. Okay, now let's say there's 100 Google employees and they have investments in Apple, but they don't have investments in Google. Okay, so again, 100 Google employees have not invested in Google themselves, but have invested in Apple. Now let's take 100 Apple employees and let's say they have not invested in Apple, but they've invested in Google. Okay, and these 100 employees in each company, they collectively own more than 50% of Google and Apple respectively, right? So the 100 Google employees own 51% of Apple, and the 100 Apple employees own 51% of Google. Now, these are middle-class employees, okay? Their wages are stagnating. Inflation's going up, right? The prices are going up. Their wages are stagnating. They are basically paying the price for, they're paying for the inflation, and they're getting threatened by the woes of poverty, right? They're getting a little fearful because of the poverty that they're beginning to be thrusted into, right? What can these Google and Apple employees do? Well, it's simple, okay? They own 51% of the companies that they're invested in. So it is mutually beneficial for both of these companies, or rather both of these groups of employees, these 200 employees, to organize in such a way that begins to control the everyday operations of Apple and Google. Okay, so what'll happen when they do that is all of a sudden you have the Google employees helping to raise the wages of the Apple employees, and you have the Apple employees helping to raise the wages of the Google employees. And in effect, they take the control from the wealthy investors, from the investment banks, who are controlling the everyday operations of these companies, those who were driving the wages down and driving the prices up. The bottom line here is, again, we need class solidarity. We need class organization. And if you allow your fears of wealth inequality to distract you from your innate ability to organize with your working class employees, then you're going to get more of the same. You're going to continue to be stressed out economically, again, because you're not organized, okay? If you allow these wealthy investors, these investment banks, to control the operations of these corporations that you work for, they are going to control you. They're going to steal the value of your labor in order to profit, okay? The wealthy investors are piggybacking not only off of the value production of the employees, that one's obvious, but they're piggybacking off of the investments made by the middle class. They're piggybacking off of your fear of poverty. And again, it's kind of strange that if you think about a logical way to structure an economy, you would give the employees of a company the ownership to the profits of that company, right? That would be the most logical scenario, so that you wouldn't have, again, the Apple employees needing to organize to fight for the wages of the Google employees and vice versa. But that's not the way capitalism works, right? We can buy into companies. You know, that's what capitalism is. You can invest in companies, right? And again, if you fail to organize with the middle class, the ruling class, the wealthy class, will eat you alive. And that's what's happening. That's why the wealth inequality is going up. So if you are not an owner in this country, and then you're falling behind. If you do not own stock, you're going to fall behind. Or maybe you own your own private business, and technically you own stock in that case, right? You own a company. But again, if you're an employee without stock, you're going to fall behind, and the only way you fight that is by organizing with your fellow employees. Again, so there's two ways to do that. The first is democratization of the workplace. Okay, that's the obvious one. That's the labor strikes and the unions, right? The second is to organize with the fellow middle class shareholders that own these large companies. Otherwise, again, you're being puppeteered by the wealthy class. You have to understand this phenomenon in the stock market, because guess who does understand it? BlackRock, Vanguard, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett. They all know how this works. They all know that if the middle class stays complacent and they never organize, then they can continue to puppeteer the everyday operations of these corporations. They will continue to drive the wages down, drive the prices up, and who does that hurt? Well, the middle class. If you're lucky, you might kind of stay afloat. If you're really lucky, you might get wealthy, and by and large, though, probably gonna fall into poverty. And again, the proof is out there. We know the wealth inequality is decreasing, right? Or increasing, rather. We know that we saw how much wealth was transferred to the 1% since COVID, right? And it's pretty obvious why it's happening if you actually pay attention. You just have to forget the racial differences with people. You have to forget the gender differences. You have to forget the cultural differences. You have to realize that the economy is all that matters here, okay? Because at the end of the day, when people start starving, are you going to, when someone breaks into your house, are you going to ask them what their gender is? No, you're going to defend yourself. Are people going to, if you go in to break into someone's house to get food, are you gonna walk away if they're the same, if they identify as the same gender as you? Like, is that how it's going to work? No. People are going to get chaotic. People are going to get violent. And it's not because of the gender. It's not because of race. It's not because of culture. It's because of the economy. So understand what happens when you invest in a company, because unless you are working with other middle class investors to control the operations of that company, you're just getting shafted by the billionaires who control the operations of those corporations, especially in large companies, especially when you invest in the S&P 500. So another tip, another bit of advice, try to invest in smaller companies, small local companies, right? And your investment doesn't even have to be financial. Go work for a small local company, okay? And you know what? If you're not making the same wage as maybe you would have working for some larger company, it's probably a sign that it's probably a good sign. You might have to take a hit in order to beat these large companies. Again, the best thing to do, though, is democratize the workplace. You have to, labor strikes, labor unions, that's the number one thing we need to do in this country. We need a national strike, and we need it yesterday. Thanks for watching.